All right, everyone, it's 12 o'clock, so let's get started. My name is Brittany Holm, and welcome to our final Trail Talk Tuesday of the year. It's a privilege to host this incredible series over the course of the last 6 months, and I'm super excited for what we have in store today for y'all. This series has been an incredible journey across Kansas, exploring trails, communities, and the people who bring them to life. And what a great 6 months it's been. We celebrated Kansas showing up big on the national trail stage when the Flint Hills Trail was inducted to the Rails to Trail Conservancy Hall of Fame. Also, another huge highlight was our executive director, Mike Scanlon's powerful ride for resilience across the state, visiting over 60 trails, 50 communities in 30 days, raising over $47,000, benefiting Kansas Trails Inc. and Go to Lung Cancer. What an incredible accomplishment. Before we jump in, here's a little teaser. 2026 is going to be huge. We're rolling into the new year with momentum, fresh energy, and more ways than ever to get involved. Q1 is stacked with events, trainings, and trail magic. You definitely won't want to miss out. And speaking of the trail magic, our Trailcraft trail building series at the Horse Thief Reservoir out near Jetmore, Kansas, is happening this January. If you've ever wondered how to build a trail, maintain a trail, or just want to dig in literally, this hands-on learning series is for you. Registration the application deadline ends on the 15th of December, so be sure to apply today. As this is our final session of 2025, we really want your feedback on this Trail Talk Tuesday series. Please take a few, I'll send out a participant survey after we're finished today. Please take a second to fill it out. We'd love your insight, how we can improve upon any of these future Trail Talk sessions. Trail Talk Tuesday is made possible only because of the incredible people that support us. A big thank you to the Kansas Trails Inc. Board of Directors, to the Kansas Trails Congress for their vision, leadership, and endless dedication to building a stronger, connected Kansas Trail community. And also, a huge shout out to the Sunflower Foundation. Their support's been integral to the success of Kansas Trails Inc. Now, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Michele Archie of the Harbinger Consultancy. Michele is a nationally recognized expert who helps conservation, heritage, and economic development organizations collaborate with rural communities to create meaningful community-driven solutions. She brings a deep expertise in trail accessibility, sustainable development, and the power of place-based projects. We're so honored to have her here today with us to explore what trail accessibility really means for communities and for Kansas. So I'm going to turn it over now to Michele Archie.
Thank you, Brittany, and hey, everybody. I'm also a giant fan of what you're doing in Kansas. It's been a little bit of a road, and it's really great to see you all really hitting your stride on a statewide basis. So, as Brittany mentioned, our topic today is accessible trails, but I never really think about accessible trails without thinking about accessible trail communities. So that's kind of the broad boundaries of what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to talk for about half an hour, so we have plenty of time to have questions and answers and talk among ourselves. But just a little bit about me. So I've been working for very long time in rural community and economic development. And the way that I really started in this work was doing a lot of economic studies that we tried to do in collaborative ways. So everybody was really part of the study, focusing on gateway communities and trails, other recreation areas, national parks, state parks, World Heritage sites, and so forth. And once you get a bunch of people around the table understanding a little bit more about their economic relationship, what we found is that there are almost always these what next questions. So we understand kind of how we might be able to collaborate better, but what should we do next? And a lot of times those what next questions really focused on tourism, kind of community-driven tourism, outdoor recreation, trails, all that sort of stuff. So that led to a very deep dive into this general field of using outdoor recreation as a community development strategy and an economic development strategy. And it might come as no surprise, but accessibility questions, you cannot get away from them. They are really right in your face. And now I see more and more people talking about the size of the kind of the disability travel market, the number of people who will experience some kind of disability in their lives. And even just thinking more broadly in our communities, I think we can all look around and see that we have a lot of opportunities to engage people in um, participating in outdoor recreation and using our trails. So the other thing that all of this led me to and led us to as an organization over time is to the awareness that the kinds of organizations and the kinds of communities and community groups that you all represent have a tremendous capacity and don't need to pay consultants to do everything for you. So we have developed and continue to develop a bunch of online courses that are kind of do-it-yourself courses, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And there's one in particular that I think might be interesting to you, given this topic. So what I hope you'll take away from this is a broad and very practical way to think about accessibility, examples of little changes that might make a big difference. I'll share these with Brittany. We were just talking before the webinar started about sharing a bunch of resources, including some mini assessments. That one of them is tied to a framework that we'll use during this webinar. So just a lot of ideas and kind of inspiration and tools for moving forward with accessible kind of expanding accessibility for your own trails and in your own communities. So I think that if I say the word accessible trails, a lot of times we're going to think about this. It's kind of a wide, flat, pretty even, hard packed or hard surface with a gentle grade. And that's kind of, in some ways, a starting point. It shouldn't be our ending point. I think we can think a lot more creatively about accessibility, but this is sort of going to the Americans with Disabilities Act kind of mental model of what a fully accessible trail might look like. And this kind of surface, this kind of width, this kind of grade has a lot of benefits for being open to a lot of people with a lot of different abilities participating or using trails, but it's not really the be all and end all of accessible trails. So what else can accessible trails look like? So this is a whole variety of pictures of accessible trails from, a nicely hard packed trail that can be navigated maybe on a special wheelchair, a trail that works for a regular mountain biker as well as an adaptive mountain biker, trails that can be accessed by people with guide dogs, people with strollers, trails that kind of welcome people with different neural or neurodivergent sort of neural sensitivities or neural capacities. So the Autism Nature Trail in Letchworth State Park is an example of that. And I think that there's maybe a sensory garden that's being developed possibly in Topeka, but you all know where that is in Kansas. So kind of ways of engaging and interacting with different sensory experiences on a trail. So it's not all just flat, all just walking, all just moving in one direction, but using a lot of different capacities and ways of seeing and skills. This on the right-hand side is the Independence Trail in California, which was constructed along an old mining flume or mining ditch. So all of these are accessible in one way or another. And I would say that this all is part of trail accessibility too. Not that every trail has to be equally accessible to all people all of the time, but that these are some things that lead to or can be used to kind of lead expansions in access. So on the left, these bilingual signs in the White River National Forest in Colorado are an acknowledgement that a lot of people in that part of Colorado speak Spanish as their first language and not English. Clear wayfinding. If you're in a wheelchair, you want to go that way. If you're hiking, you can proceed forward. Rest areas, shade, places to kind of take in a view and take a rest along the way. Accessible kayak launches, which, by the way, are really great also for kids or anybody who has balance issues, not just for people using wheelchairs or people who are scared of the water. These accessible kayak launches are kind of for everybody. And that's one message about accessibility, that often improvements that we make for one group or to improve accessibility among kind of a particular segment of our community or of our residents or of our visitors will really serve other people. This is an adult changing table, which is also good for kids. So a lot, I've read recently some pretty interesting data about how many people are mobility impaired or families with kids who need a changing table, and just a little baby changing tables doesn't do it for everyone. So all kinds of things to think about when we think about accessibility. I'll get to this Ohio Pile sign in a moment. In all of this, little changes can make a big difference. And so one thing to think about is, you don't have to, it's a good idea to have kind of accessibility questions in mind if you're at the very beginning and designing a trail. But often these little things that can happen or decisions that get made along the way, even after a trail is developed, can expand accessibility or contract accessibility. So these are a couple of pictures. This is a woman whose wheelchair would not fit through the gaps between these boulders on this trail. The boulders are designed to keep motorized vehicles out, but they also kept her wheelchair out. And moving the boulder just a few inches expanded accessibility so that a wheelchair could access, and still a truck would probably have a hard time getting in. This is an example of there was some excavation in the park area, and they couldn't figure out what to do with the sand that they had from the dune excavation. So they put it all at the beginning of the trail, which seemed like a really nice transition from the parking lot to the trail, except that it was deep and difficult to navigate for people walking. People with balance issues, wheelchairs, etc. So finding a different place to put the sand, it seemed like a nice idea, but ultimately wasn't that functional. This trail sign shows the path ahead. This is one of those both gradient and elevation maps. So this sign shows you that there's a very steep part of the trail. And as we were preparing for this webinar, Brittany, I think you mentioned in your community that there's a trail that has a really steep section in it. If you can help people understand that what's ahead, it helps them make their own decisions or at least be prepared. Like, oh, maybe it'll be really hard to push my stroller up that hill. So showing the path ahead can really help people plan ahead. A couple of other little changes that can make a big difference. So these are different ways of orienting drainage gaps in bridges or boardwalks. And you always see boardwalks with the gaps between the boards going across the trail. That's much easier to roll across. It's typically much easier to ride across and much easier to walk across. And then you can see that this guy on his wheelchair with the drainage gaps going in the same direction as he's going, the potential for getting a wheel stuck in those gaps or really anything else stuck in those gaps is pretty big. So just a really small change, big difference. Adding places to rest is a really big deal, not just for people who have who are using a wheelchair or a walker or maybe have balance issues and are using a ski pole, but really for everybody, for people with kids, for people like me who I just tweaked my back a while ago and I really enjoy having a place to sit down. So thinking about sort of the range of people that we want to have use our trails and what might make our trails work better for them, from them is really important. Because why do we build trails in the first place? We build trails so that people will use them. And really, you can think about accessibility as a code word for how can we help more people use our trails. So this is my five bucket way of thinking about what goes into um, trail accessibility. And you can expand these buckets to really think about what goes into community accessibility, into outdoor recreation accessibility, and I don't think there's really anything magic about this framework. It just works for me. It makes me think across a bunch of different categories. So infrastructure, I think that's where we just started. It's where a lot of people start their thinking about accessibility in general, and especially accessible outdoor recreation and accessible trails. So there are physical conditions or physical attributes that enable or limit access. And we talked about some of those. Some of those might be the width of your trail, the grade, the surface, kind of its cross slope. Does it slope away? Is it hard to stay on the trail? Entrances, boulders, gate surfaces. Can you guys still see my slides? Yeah. Okay. So um, choke points in your trails, parking, restrooms, all of that kind of stuff in town, whether you have sidewalks, and if you don't have sidewalks, you have a safe place for anybody to pass through your community. Do you have any sort of shoulder that's navigable and safe? So just thinking about also the way that your trail and your town connect, all of those things kind of go into infrastructure. And that's where we started. But also then kind of going around the circle, equipment. So there are tools that allow a wider range of people to use the same spaces. So things like adaptive bicycles, all-terrain wheelchairs, beach mats or water mats. So roll out kind of temporary installation. I want to get my chair or my unbalanced self down to the beach or my stroller. So that kind of a rollout mat. Even things like trekking poles or removing snow in parking lots or on sidewalks. If you have mobility equipment rentals, universal changing tables, all of that kind of thing, all this sort of gear and equipment is part of the accessibility picture. And one role that trail organizations can play, um, especially if you can find or generate an adaptive equipment partner, is to host trail events where people get to try out equipment and become aware of equipment that they might not know about. And then other trail users can see that equipment, not just people who are going to use it. So you might think about your trail organization. How could you help to provide or familiarize trail users with this kind of equipment? Outfitters, other partners like a Center for Independent Living, community business, a library. Some libraries lend adaptive bikes or sensory kits or even outdoor gear. So it's often overlooked, but it's this kind of thing that sits in between your trail and the people who might use it. Another big thing, we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth, is information. And what I hear from most people who have any kind of special sort of accessibility need is that the level and type of information that we provide to them about our trails, about our communities, about our local businesses is often not really specific enough to help them make a decision about whether to use a trail, about whether to travel to a community, about whether they're going to be able to get into a business once they get to it. So information is really key. Accurate, trustworthy, and specific information helps people make their own decisions. So there's this idea, if you hang around these circles very long, called the dignity of risk. And we can think about this in our own lives too. We each have sort of a different appetite for risk and a different appetite for adventure. And it's the same whether you're, walking dependent or wheelchair dependent, whether are vision dependent or low vision. So information really helps you understand a little bit more about the kind of experience you're likely to have and make a decision about whether you want to or don't want to. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. Um, so I know I will get to questions at the end, but if there's anything that comes up during this that you just want to ask that's sort of on point with the slides and the presentation, go ahead. I would just say and unmute yourself and ask. And if you have other questions, it'd be great to use the chat like you just did. So we'll talk about information in a minute. Assistance, what is that? That's another kind of piece that sits in between the people who might use your trail and your trail itself. So guided hikes or volunteer trail buddies or staff that are trained in disability etiquette or people who can help with transfers to adaptive gear or trailhead hosts or trail ambassadors. Um, Also kind of just general navigation support, here's how to get from here to there. So it can be really light touch, but really transformative. And I think the final piece for me is kind of a cultural piece, and it's attitude. It's attitude of trail builders, trail maintainers, trail advocates, trail organizers, trail communities. Do we want to expand participation, expand who uses our trail? Do we have kind of a can-do attitude? There's really a great organization in Hawaii called Access Surf. And they started with a couple of people in pickup trucks, surfboards, and basically, I'm serious, duct tape. Like, whatever it takes to get people out surfing, we're going to do it. If we have to tape your wheelchair to a surfboard, if we have to tape you to a surfboard, if we need to go tandem, whatever it takes. And so I think that kind of whatever it takes and what can we do with what we have attitude is really important, especially when it comes to welcoming people who don't show up, usually, or inviting people with different perspectives to help us understand. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too. So generally, and I said we wanted to spend a bit more time with information because I think this is really low-hanging fruit for almost everybody um, that we can provide better information about our um, trails, about our trailheads, and about our communities that really help all kinds of people figure out how they can recreate on our trails and whether they want to. So accessibility isn't accessibility isn't accessibility. And one thing I learned from one of the things in our resources is a website called Becoming Rentable. And Becoming Rentable is kind of on a mission to expand the number and quality of accessible short-term rentals across the country. And so it's a short-term rental platform like Airbnb or like Vrbo. They're really only focused on properties that are accessible in a variety of ways. So it's a really great resource. There will be a link in the resources that I share that'll be on the KTI website. But one of the things that their founder, Wadsworth, told me was it's a really big difference to say we have wide doorways between saying that and saying, here's how wide our doorways are. And saying, oh, it's pretty accessible, which is a reaction that I've gotten when I've asked, businesses, are you accessible? Yeah, pretty much. So, but what does that really mean? So, in order to get to the accessible entrance, does somebody need to kind of get pushed through a deep gravel parking lot in order to get to the back door? And then what can you access from the back door? Or what are the actual barriers or actual things that you've done to either improve access or the remaining barriers? Again, not saying just kind of throwing up your hands and saying we're not accessible because we couldn't make it perfect, but here's how accessible or to whom we might be accessible. So if you can describe things in a good level of detail that affect accessibility, it goes a long way to helping people understand what they might be up for or in for, right? And so even down to the level of sensory information, like maybe there are a lot of typically loud noises near the trail, or you're going to encounter dogs off leash, or you're going to have to go across a bridge, things that um, might be kind of triggers for people. You, you can flag those so people understand and are prepared. They might still choose to use your trail, but they'll be more prepared. And then make your information accessible. So you're trying to give information about accessibility, but making your information accessible is really important too. And that goes across website and social media. There are pretty well established standards and practices for making um, those kinds of communications devices online acceptable or accessible, using stories and descriptions from real trail users, offering offline friendly or printable information so people don't always have to have cell service, or they can spend more time with preparing, using icons on wayfinding maps, not just color-coded lines. So if for people with visual impairments or even just color blindness, the color-coded lines can be really hard to even identify. Multilingual, even if it's just some basic words and phrases, using plain language. Don't overcrowd your signs. So if people have to really stop and spend 10 minutes to deconstruct your sign, unless it's, like a history sign at your kiosk, that's a wayfinding sign just needs to say, super obviously go this way or go that way. Also, audio format signage. Right here is a really interesting free app. The beacons are not free, but they're pretty low cost, and it offers a way, um, if you have low vision, or you get kind of easily turned around to engage with and understand your surroundings. It also can translate information into 35 languages. So it's not just for people who can't see, it might be also for people who don't understand what your signage is or where they are. Overall, I think the biggest piece of accessibility is your community's mindset, and it really matters. It really makes a big difference. So another way to think about accessibility is welcoming more people into your trail culture. So every community that's near a trail, or every community that's investing in trails, can build a local trail culture. And in Amy Camp's book, Deciding on Trails, 7 Practices of Healthy Trail Towns, was just really super readable, super full of examples and like real world, just how do we connect our communities better to our trails. and our trails better to our communities. One of these seven practices is creating a trail culture. It's one of the core practices in the book. And I think the more that we think about who is a part of our trail culture and who is not a part of our trail culture, who might be, but they're just maybe don't feel welcome, don't understand the equipment, haven't grown up being outside, haven't grown up using trails, different ways of expanding who is part of our trail culture and trail communities. So this is in Brownsville, Texas. It's an open street event. A lot of places have them where you close the streets to motorized vehicles and you basically encourage people to get out and walk and roller skate and skateboard and ride their bikes and, whatever way they want to get around that's pedal powered or person powered, that's what the streets are open for. And a lot of these events also have um, bike rentals or ride a bike for the first time stations. They might have a bike repair station. They have lots of entertainment and food and rest stops, interesting places to just stop and enjoy being outside and being with other people. This is one really great way to, even for little communities, to kind of celebrate the fact that we can all be outside together. So, four things your community can do. We talked about accessible trails and infrastructure kind of a lot. You can invest in that, even little changes to help your trails and infrastructure be more accessible. Provide that reliable and clear information. Virtual tours are really great for this. This is what it really looks like to use our trail. Um, Training and customer service, we talked about that's that assistance piece of the in the five buckets. So you might do staff training to help people understand better how to welcome and assist guests who have disabilities, questions to ask, like, do you want help? So I've seen this great kind of video of a woman who uses crutches to walk and she's navigating opening a door and somebody came up to be really helpful and open the door for her, which made her fall, basically lose her balance and fall through the door. So, you know, do you how do you approach a situation where you don't know if somebody needs help? Lodging and restaurant and accommodations, education. And really, I think the most important thing is to really collaborate and promote. So you can partner. We talked a little bit about this with adaptive recreation groups. There are disability travel influencers. You can figure out who they are and how to find them, how to engage with them. Highlight accessibility in your marketing materials and feature stories. Be specific. Um, use and use websites like Becoming Rentable that has a quiz, kind of an accessibility quiz for property owners. How close are you to, being ready to list your property on Becoming Rentable? Very interesting educational tool. And I think for me, the main thing is to do with and not for. So these are photographs taken by and of activities by the Idaho Access Project. Um, and they're a pretty interesting organization that's made up of people with all different kinds of abilities and disabilities. And they're basically advocates for more accessibility, more accessible housing, more accessible recreation, more accessible and safe downtown areas. Very interesting website to poke around on. And what I've learned from them is that there's in their work together, there is so much mutual respect, so much listening to each other and the way that they engage with the local governments that they work with the tourism operators that they work with the trail folks that they that they work with, is really an open loop. It's, look, I don't know everything about accessibility, and that's for sure. None of us do. None of us knows what it is like to be another person with another person's set of abilities. So we can't really learn that unless we really listen to each other and have a shared purpose of addressing barriers, of exploring our trails together, exploring our communities together, looking for low-hanging fruit or big ambitious projects that might make things more safe, more accessible, more open, and more welcoming um, for everyone. And then also starting small, working together, and making sure you celebrate success. So one of the things that the Idaho Access Project does is they do these sort of multi-disability outdoor recreation trips, and I'll share a few videos from these in when I share the resources. But to me, these are super interesting because you really can help these folks, I think, really help individual businesses and communities understand little things that they might be able to do better to help more people engage in outdoor recreation. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because I'm just going to share these, but I just want to flag what's in my kind of resource kit. Um, so there are specific resources, and I'll add a few more to these. There are some good resources about um, accessible mountain bike trails, like building accessible mountain bike trails, building accessible kind of multi-use trails, building accessible hiking trails. There are some good resources about that. So on the infrastructure side of things, I'll add some more resources. And then in the Kansas Community Toolbox, which is 100% online, which is a really great tool that you guys all probably know about, but I talk about everywhere. Um, it's just a really great toolkit for community processes, and one of the things that they have is an overview of tactics for modifying access barriers and opportunities, and an overview of changing the physical structure of the community. So those are two resources on physical aspects of accessibility. AARP has an absolute ton of resources on age-friendly communities and livable communities that they define as livable for all ages. Um, they also have a grant program opening up, like a Livable Communities grant program opening up in January. So that's worth thinking about as a possible source of funding. Bunch of resources for outdoor recreation, accessibility guidebooks, mapathons to kind of offer accessibility insights, lots of resources, and this becoming rentable quiz to gauge accessibility level for both mobility and cognitive disabilities. Disabled Hikers is a pretty interesting community that you might be able to tap into locally. So tons and tons of accessibility resources, and I will add a few mini assessments or checklists, including one that's tied to the 5 buckets. Um, and I'll talk about why we're doing that in a minute, but also uh, an event that happened in in November, the Accessible Rural Community Solutions Roundtable will have the event recordings and resource guide up soon, and that's not specifically about accessible outdoor recreation, but a couple of the little 5-minute solution story presentations involve trails and parks. Idaho Access Project, we just talked about them. And I am super excited because I just learned that we're going to be collaborating with Idaho Access Project on our new Building Access from the Ground Up course, which is already open for registration on our website. But I've been kind of trying to twist Idaho Access Project's arm into collaborating on this course. So I think it's going to be a way better course because we're going to be working together again across people with all different abilities. So if this course is interesting to you, you can use the code KTI10 for a 10% discount. And Brittany, I'll share that with you directly as well. And then just a really short commercial because this is part of our work that I am super interested in. That discount code will work for all of our courses, and all of our courses are really designed, like I said in the beginning, as courses that help you build on your own capacity as an organization or a community or a trail group and take that next step, kind of leverage the resources you already have to do the things that you really want to do without hiring a consultant. And really, if you have any questions, anything that you want to talk about that we don't get to in the next 20 minutes, this is my email address, michelle@harbingerconsult.com. And I would love to just hear from you and talk about you. So, parting thought, you don't have to be an expert in anything, in disabilities and accessibility and so go from where you are, take your passion, take what you care about, and just keep expanding those circles. So that is probably well more than enough for me. Let's chat.
Looks like David put in a question. David, do you want to unmute and read it? Are you still here, David? He must have hopped off, but David has a student who's interested in joining his mountain biking team. He's physically challenged due to a brain injury. What are the recommended resources for adaptive bike equipment so we can get him on the trail?
So um, I'm trying to think of, there are some really good organizations for this. Move United is one of them. And maybe I can make a list of these. Bikes for Everybody is another one. Adaptability, so two words, adaptability. Um, and I think that's kind of where I would start is to look for organizations that are really about connecting people with different types of injuries or disabilities with equipment that's appropriate for them. Um, and I think that Bikes for Everybody and Bikes for Everybody, I think, has um, like a local listings for local organizations that might be helpful. Move United has sort of an affiliate program, so I might just start there and then have them help guide the next steps.
And as Michelle mentioned, I'm going to put all of the information and all the resources will be up on our KTI website under the Trail Talk Tuesdays. And because you joined today, you'll get an email with the links to all of that. So just a heads up on there, she'll have such amazing, amazing resources for us all to use for all of the things that we're doing in our communities.
So if you all don't have questions or anything to say, I always come equipped with approximately 1 million questions for you, but I want to leave it open for you to either talk about what's on your mind or ask questions or seek input from each other. Any thoughts or questions?
Hi, Brittany. This is Monica from Greenbush. And Michelle, I just want to tell you thank you so much. There's a couple of us on this call from um, a location in Southeast Kansas where we're hoping to develop trails that historically haven't been, extensively used, but really appreciate the philosophy as well as general knowledge and ideas around working with individuals with disabilities and the complexity of that and the wide range. We work with a lot of families with kids 0 to 3 with delays and disabilities and finding opportunities for families to practice being out, having, the chance to have risky play and to participate, looking at the strollers. We have kids that, are big, big kids, but they're in strollers with mobility limitations. And just, the visuals of that are just such a great message and one that we hope to be able to do and use and promote. And just the recognition that the sensory components of individuals who sometimes struggle with cognitive issues. And I think your information is just fantastic. And from those of us who work with kids and families who oftentimes don't have chances, thanks for bringing it to everybody's attention.
Well, Stacey, I'm curious for you, like what's the feedback or the you mentioned, I guess, let me ask my question and then
Yeah,
clarify it first. I never
sure.
do that. Um, so I'm curious, like what you hear from the people that you work with, like what are they missing or what would help them feel more comfortable and confident? And you mentioned even just places to practice or times to practice. I'm curious, like what that looks like or what else seems to make a
Sure.
difference.
Sure. And we're triplets here. There's three Stacy Clarksons, but the real Stacy
Oh,
Clarkson
sorry, you're
is,
Monica.
but that's okay. I say Stacy because we all registered under the same link. So we're just trying to mess with you, really.
You're
What
doing a
we
good job.
hear, what we hear, especially with those kids under 5, signage is so important. So the family can decide, are we going to do this or not? So your information regarding, what can I expect, right? That is great. We don't, hear that everything has to be perfect asphalt. A lot of people think, oh my gosh, to your first slide, it doesn't have to be that. Um, that it just so I really know what to expect. How far is it? What are the obstacles that we might reach? What's on the other end? Right? So when you're working with little kids, that cause and effect. If we go this far, then there'll be a fish, those kind of things. The other thing that we hear and see frequently is we have kids that wear, braces. They're just learning how to use the braces or some kind of assisted opportunity. And, just again, knowing that it's an option, and I can I can participate. What we see a lot of is not being sure how the kid is, and you see me in quotation marks, going to behave. So for a kid who sometimes struggles with language and behavior, knowing that you can go to an open space like this, and if they run off, where are the safe spots? Where are the spots of concern, right? And also that if we have a meltdown, where might I go and cool, like to your point about the having a place to sit down, bathrooms, all of those kind of things that, kind of managing the expectations are some of the things that we hear from our staff.
Yeah, super interesting. The Autism Nature Trail in Letchworth State Park, it's in upstate New York. It's very easy to find information about the Autism Nature Trail. And they have really interesting different zones. And so you can kind of pick the experience based on the zone. And I've seen that in accessible playgrounds, for example, that there are more quiet kind of and I think in the Autism Nature Trail, they have like sort of a quiet area for each of the zones. And so there's always kind of a place to cool down and always some sort of way to interact that's different. So super interesting. Thank you, Monica. Other thoughts, other things
Yeah.
that are,
Um, my name is Nathan Hobbs. I live in Northern California, but I'm trying to build a cycling tour business out of my hometown of Newton. And I'm just curious how many of the people here have accessible trails that they're already managing.
Anybody?
I saw the lady with the Kansas Trails sign behind her raise her hand. I don't know.
We do have an accessible trail. It's a 1 mile paved trail that is around our sports complex.
Okay, cool. All right. Opportunity for development there. Thanks.
Nathan, tell us a little bit more about your kind of business idea without
Yeah.
revealing any proprietary secrets.
Oh, well, it's really not that proprietary. So I've worked as an adventure guide my entire professional career doing whitewater rafting, climbing, mountain biking. And as we know, the Flint Hills are a hot commodity these days. Um, and I'm working to develop relationships with landowners so that we can do overnight trips in the Flint Hills, doing camping out in the open prairie, and then cycling from site to site between 35 to 65 miles a day, hopefully 4 nights out in the prairie. Um, and just kind of the nature of the zone, I think, lends itself to accessible trails because there's not as many obstacles out there as you find like here in Northern California. I've built some accessible mountain bike trails with our local bike club, and getting a trail bed that's wide enough and free of trees, and then all of the access aspects just to get to the trailhead. There's challenges because there's boulders, trees, bush everywhere. And the Flint Hills is pretty unique in that there's a pretty decent road system that people already use to travel. And to develop a trail through the prairie that would be motorized bicycle or well, really any sort of bicycle sense that I'm focusing on. It's seems pretty achievable, and I think that could be a unique selling point for the area. There's not a ton of uh, accessible trail networks and accessible trail tours that I'm aware of. So.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's right. Mike Scanlon, I'm wondering what you saw on your um, outrageous tour across Kansas trails.
So accessibility depends where you are in the state of Kansas. So you're going to have a group of, I'll call them trail enthusiasts that have also become gravel enthusiasts. So gravel biking is huge in Kansas. And especially when you get out around Abilene, the Lovewell Reservoir, Russell, Emporia. So you're probably familiar with Unbound Gravel, which is the big gravel race in Emporia each spring. And so I look at sort of the accessibility issue from and having worked in the mountains of Colorado right off the Rio Grande Trail as we were making trail connections. I had a woman by the name of Sarah who had a ski accident. So she was confined to a wheelchair, and she was sort of my mobility expert. And the thing that she always kind of like pounded into my head, it's the surfaces that matter and communicating the surfaces, because even on the Rio Grande Trail, you get up near Aspen and all of a sudden you go from pavement to crushed limestone to more mud to crushed limestone back to pavement. And she says, nowhere on that trail is that communicated. You could get up there and all of a sudden, if you started in a place called Woody Creek, all of a sudden all of your surfaces are different. And she said it's that integration between like your sidewalk system, your parking lot to that trailhead that I have my most difficulty. that gravel parking lot isn't a gravel parking lot. It's like AB3 and it's boulders like, rocks like this. And then all of a sudden I get to the trail and it works. But getting from my vehicle into my wheelchair to that trailhead is not what you think it is. You think it's all flat, yeah, but the surfaces are so much different. And those surfaces change during the course of the seasons. So it's what you talked about, Michelle, in terms of that communication and then kind of understanding where people are and what that trailhead and those pieces look like. To Nathan's point, the Flint Hills Trail, you're on a rail bed, so you don't have incline issues, but what you have is kind of trail surface issues that change kind of as you're going across the Flint Hills Trail. And then I will tell you, if you're doing it in the fall, here's something you don't think about necessarily in California, but you see it when you're riding on October 15th. There were 2 or 3 miles, I'll hit a walnut grove, and there are walnuts everywhere. It is not the same surface that you might think. And then you have hedge apples that are kind of unique to Kansas. And all of a sudden, you have 100 feet of like more hedge apples than you've ever seen in your life. So I think, one of the things is one, kind of educating all users on what trail conditions kind of can look like from season to season. And then understanding how you're connecting parking lots and access points to that trail. That trail might be, mobility. You can enrich the mobility in terms of its connection to your parking lots and your trailheads. And the surface might work, but you start getting away from it and it all looks different to somebody that's, impaired in terms of their mobility. I mean, it looks completely different. We're good at making bathrooms work. We're good at making the sidewalks to the bathroom work. We're not so good at making the parking lots work, nor the access to the trails.
Right.
So
And some
kind
of
of
this is just, some of this is common sense, but some of it is that it's really hard to see this through eyes that aren't your eyes. And so,
correct.
that kind of reaching out and partnering with people who do have mobility issues, who do want to get
Correct.
out, who can help you is super critical.
Yeah,
So,
because Sarah helped me when I was in basalt, saying that like, hey, crushed limestone's great until the shoulder seasons when it's rainy and wet, and all of a sudden there's grooves everywhere, and then it froze overnight, and you come across a section and you can't get across it because it's frozen with grooves that are like that thick, and all of a sudden your wheelchair ends up in the grooves. She says you don't see it because you're walking across it or you're on a bike and you're going across it fairly fast, but change where you are and it changes what you see.
yeah.
Because she would tell me, get down here to about 2 feet and let me show you what it looks like. It doesn't look the same.
Super interesting. Thanks, Mike. Well, thanks everyone. Brittany, I think we've gone almost to the very end. I know you still have a survey to talk about.
Anybody else have any more questions? We do have 2 more minutes. Anybody want to get the last one in? No? All right. Well, we'll have Michelle's information on our website, and we'll have the ability to check out all the resources again that I mentioned that we'll be posting on the website. So again, we do have a survey. I'll send that out after today's session and after I get everything posted, so I don't flood you with the information. And so I think that's a wrap for Trail Talk Tuesday, this fall series. We really appreciate all of you joining us, whether it was just for today or whether you've been on for every single episode. It's just so fantastic to have the support of our state and all the trail enthusiasts that we're trying to support. Don't forget to follow us on social media, follow the Kansas Trails Inc. website. We've got big things coming in 2026, and we'd love for you to be a part of it all. So, without further ado, thanks again for everything and for joining us. And until we see you next time, we'll see you on the trail. Thank you.